Since the inauguration of Pepe Lobo as the president of Honduras on January 27th, the U.S. State Department has been the new government's most vocal supporter, urging the region to follow the U.S. lead in restoring relations with the Honduran government. Relations that were largely cut after the military coup of June 2009. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton made Honduras one of her top priorities on her recent tour of Latin America.
We think that Honduras has taken important and necessary steps that deserve the recognition and the normalization of relations. Other countries in the region say that they want to wait a while. I don't know what they're waiting for, but that's their right to wait.
Among the countries not recognizing the Lobo government is Brazil, whose representative spoke out against the U.S. at the Organization of American States.
Parece-me que as datas de 29 de novembro do ano passado e 27 de janeiro deste ano não produziram milagre. A situação dos direitos humanos em Honduras é uma situação gravíssima e que está refletida muito adequadamente no relatório apresentado pela Comissão Interamericana de Direitos Humanos há poucos dias. Muito obrigado.
That report confirmed in the month of February alone more than 50 illegal detentions, 8 cases of torture, 2 kidnappings and 2 rapes, all carried out against members of the coup resistance. It also highlighted some of the recent political assassinations. Honduras analyst Adrian Pine led the American Anthropological Association to vote to reject the Lobo government and condemn recent human rights violations.
Yeah, a lot of people think that since Pepe Lobo is in power that there's been some kind of resolution to what they're calling the crisis in Honduras, which is of course a military coup that led to a de facto military government which has been killing people right and left since last June. None of that has changed. If anything, it's intensified since Pepe Lobo has come to power. We've seen over 10 people killed since Pepe Lobo was put in power, and no word from him in terms of voicing concern about the deaths of these people who are peacefully resisting the violent military-controlled regime that he now stands at the head of. We're seeing the same tactics that were used by Battalion 316, which was the infamous death squad in the 1980s. This is a battalion that whose members were trained by the CIA, many of whom also went to the School of the Americas for training in torture techniques. And the same techniques are being used today. People are being disappeared, they're being tortured, they're being assassinated, executed, they're having their hands tied behind their back. It's hard to quantify the horror, but what's particularly horrifying, I think, is that children of resistance leaders, and again, non-violent resistance leaders, are being targeted and assassinated to send a clear message to people to cease their peaceful and democratic resistance. Among the people who were assassinated is Claudia Brizuela, who was murdered in her own home. She's the daughter of a very important resistance leader, Pedro Brizuela.
The 36-year-old Brizuela was shot dead in front of her 2 children, ages 2 and 8. The Real News spoke to Father Ismael Melo Moreno, a Catholic priest from the Honduran city of El Progreso and director of the radio station Radio Progreso. Father Melo was in Washington, D.C. to counter the U.S. State Department message.
Los actores y las dinámicas que pusieron en marcha el golpe de Estado lo hicieron no para quedarse por poco tiempo, sino a partir de unas decisiones políticas de largo alcance, y que el año 2009 era apenas la puesta en marcha de un proceso de lo que nosotros hemos valorado un golpe de Estado en construcción.
Father Melo's radio station was raided and shut down by the military on the day of the coup. It was one of the few outlets that was reporting on the overthrow of President Manuel Zelaya. In the following months, many of the journalists at the radio were threatened, and one was kidnapped and tortured. While the U.S. State Department says that those days are in the past, Father Melo doesn't agree.
Lo que hay en Honduras es un ambiente de inestabilidad que en lugar de aplacarse es creciente. Una inestabilidad que en lugar de resolverse acumula conflicto.
We believe that President Lobo and his administration have taken the steps necessary to restore democracy, and
the three main points of U.S. legitimation of the current government are that there would be a free and fair election, that there would be a truth commission, an international truth commission, and then that there would be a government of national unity formed.
We believe that the free and fair elections which have elected the new president in Honduras means it's time to turn the page.
Pepe Lobo came to power in a completely illegitimate election under militarized circumstances in which freedoms of speech and assembly and the press had been all suspended in elections that were marked by violence.
These conditions gave rise to a mass resignation of candidates, including anti-coup presidential candidate Carlos H. Reyes, who resigned after police and military repeatedly attacked attendees to his public events. On one occasion, he and over 100 others were violently detained, leaving Reyes with a broken wrist. Normally, election observers would have documented these abuses, but the Honduran elections had no official international observers. The EU, OAS, UN, and Carter Center, the world's big four of election observation, all refused to participate.
The election, which was held, was by all observers found to be free, fair, and legitimate.
U.S. Ambassador to Honduras, Hugo Llorens, cited the State Department itself, along with two organizations it funds, the National Democratic Institute and the International Republican Institute, as his sources during a presentation in Washington in January.
That this process was a free, fair, and transparent process. In fact, I've been associated with Honduras for a very long time, and I would argue that probably the freest, the fairest elections ever held in Honduras. The Honduran people turned out in large numbers.
The election was boycotted by those opposed to the coup. As The Real News reported in the days following the election, the Honduran Electoral Tribunal consciously misrepresented their own data to inflate the turnout numbers. This story has since been confirmed by numerous outlets including CNN and AFP. The inflated turnout number was repeatedly referenced by Washington and others to suggest a majority of Hondurans saw the election as a way out of the crisis. Ambassador Llorens did admit, however, that the elections took place under an abusive regime.
That since June 28th, it was a significant deterioration in the human rights situation in Honduras. We're talking about, arbitrary detentions, arbitrary searches of homes, excessive use of force on a number of occasions, been beatings of detained protesters, closure of media outlets. That's very worrisome, intimidation of journalists. And I'm, again, very proud to say that no country, rest assured, no country has done more on the ground in Honduras in support of monitoring human rights, investigating scores of human rights cases, raising concerns about human rights violations, and urging the authorities to investigate the allegations. And we will insist that those people who are responsible be held accountable.
In the days following his presentation, the U.S. supported the passing by the Honduran government of a general amnesty law that protects those responsible for the coup from prosecution. As for the Truth Commission, the State Department believes it should not have the power to punish the human rights violators.
The Truth Commission doesn't have to be a blame game. It can be part of the process of national reconciliation. It can be a part of the process of Honduras re-engaging with the inter-American system, re-engaging with the OAS, and telling a story and chronicling what happened. And from there, again, without making it a blame game, you can come up to specific recommendations to the new Lobo administration on what it will take to make sure that something like this doesn't happen again. And to make sure that you can strengthen democracy.
This Truth Commission takes place while assassinations are still going on. It takes place while nothing has changed politically in Honduras, while the people who violated the Honduran democracy are being rewarded for doing that. And this is a part of rewarding them. It's being put there in place of any sort of justice, not as a complement to it.
The two key leaders of the coup and the repression that followed it, military leader Romeo Vázquez Velázquez and civilian leader Roberto Micheletti, have both been rewarded for their actions. Vázquez was named by President Lobo to head the state telephone company. This after it was Vázquez military that sent out a letter to all the mayors in Honduras 1 month before the November election, demanding contact information for all members of the coup resistance in each community. So it is troubling to many in Honduras that a military with a recent history of seeking intelligence on politically active Hondurans is now in control of the country's telephone infrastructure. Meanwhile, Micheletti has been named as a congressman for life, a position that does not exist under the Honduran constitution. As for references to a government of national unity, not one person who boycotted the election holds a position in the new Lobo administration. As Secretary Clinton left on her recent tour of Latin America, 9 U.S. members of Congress wrote her a letter. They asked that she condition the renewal of military and economic aid to Honduras on a commitment from the Lobo administration to begin prosecuting crimes committed against members of the coup resistance. Clinton never responded to their letter, choosing instead to send one of her own.
I have just sent a letter to the Congress of the United States notifying them that we will be restoring aid to Honduras.
The U.S. has been joined by numerous other countries, as well as the World Bank, IMF, and Inter-American Development Bank, in normalizing relations with Honduras. But if the evidence goes against the stated reason why the State Department is supporting the Honduran regime, what does explain the support? In Part 2, we explore how Honduras fits into the U.S. strategy for the hemisphere.